2000, France was still Africa's most influential economic partner. Its companies dominated banking, energy, transport, and even currency systems across West and Central Africa. But fast forward to today, China now trades almost 10 times more with Africa than France does. In many African capitals, Chinese-built roads, ports, and railways have quietly replaced French influence. This matters more than most people realize. Africa is the world's youngest continent, home to the fastest growing cities, and hold over 30% of the world's critical mineral needed for modern technology all over the world. So, whoever build Africa's future infrastructure doesn't just gain contracts, they gain a long-term influence over global supply chains, technology, and even politics stylishly. This story isn't about heroes and villains, it is about choices, trade-offs, and consequences. China brings speed, money, and infrastructure. France brings experience, institutions, and long-standing ties. They both claim to support Africa development, but they benefit enormously from Africa resources. Who is deceiving who? So here are 3 questions worth thinking about as an African. First, is China really offering Africa a better deal, or they are just offering a faster one? Second, is France losing interest because Africa is changing or because France failed to adapt? Third, can African countries use this rivalry to their advantage without falling into a new form of dependence? And before we begin, if you like content that explains Africa beyond stereotype and beyond easy narrative, you will probably enjoy what we do on this channel. So consider subscribing and joining the conversation. As Chinese built roads, railways, and ports spread across Africa, a new conversation has quietly entered public debate, and that conversation has to do with debt. According to the Africa Development Bank, African countries collectively owe over $134 billion loans to China. These loans are mostly tied to infrastructure. I know that sounds very huge, but context matters. China holds about 12 to 50% of Africa's external debt, while private Western lenders and multilateral institutions still hold a larger share. What makes Chinese debt different is how it is being structured. Most Chinese loans are tied to specific projects such as railway, power plant, highways, and repayments often begins before those projects fully generate revenue. That is the problem there. Kenya's Standard Gauge Railway is a perfect example. It modernized transport between Mombasa and Nairobi, but passengers and freight revenue initially fell short of repayment schedule, forcing the government to subsidize operations. France, by contrast, rarely finances large infrastructure directly anymore. French influence today flows through development agencies, EU-backed programs, and private capital. This often comes with stricter conditions, governance reform, environmental rules, and procurement standards as well. Supporters argued this protects African economics. Critics say it slows down development and keeps control outside Africa. What Africans are now realizing is that debt itself is not the enemy. Japan, South Korea, and China all use debt heavily during their development phases. The problem is that whether debt creates productive capacity or long-term dependency. A port that boosts export can pay for itself. A prestige project that doesn't generate income becomes a burden to the country. This is where Africa's role changes. Governments are becoming more selective. Ethiopia renegotiated Chinese loan term. Zambia restructured debt with China and Western creditors alike. This signals something important. Africa is no longer blindly accepting deals. It is learning, adjusting, and pushing back as well. For years, France justified its Africa presence through security. French troops operated in Mali, Niger, Chad, and Burkina Faso under counter-terrorism mission. At its peak, Operation Barkhane involved over 5,000 French soldiers in the Sahel. On paper, this looked like partnership. On the ground, many Africans saw something else. Despite years of French operation, insecurity worsened. Terrorist attacks increased, government collapsed, and public frustration grew. In 2023, French troops has been expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger Republic. Protesters waved Russian and sometimes Chinese flag, not because those countries solve Africa problem, but because France symbolizes an old unwanted order. China's security strategy is quieter. It does not patrol Africa's streets with soldiers. Instead, it sells equipment, trains personnel, and invests in surveillance technology. China-made drones, cameras, and communication systems are now used by several African governments. This approach avoids public backlash while still building influence underground. This contrast is very striking. France relied on visible forces. China relied on invisible infrastructure. One creates resistance, the other creates dependence. But there is a deeper issue Africa are now debating. Does foreign military presence actually bring stability, or does it weaken local accountability? Many African citizens now believe security must be locally owned, not at source. This shift explains why influence today is less about soldier and more about system. Influence doesn't end with trade or security. It lasts longest in classroom, language, and professional network. For decades, France dominated this space. French remained the official language in over 20 African countries. French university trained generations of African elite. French media shaped public discourse, but the influence, unfortunately, is aging and has died down totally. Young Africans today are more interested in engineering, technology, and entrepreneurship than traditional administrative careers. China noticed this early. By 2024, over 80,000 African students were studying in China, many on full scholarship. Most are enrolled in science, technology, engineering, and medicine. France still attracts African students, but their numbers have reduced drastically. Visa restriction, high living costs, and limited job opportunities after graduation has reduced its appeal to African students. Meanwhile, China offers training linked directly to projects and companies operating in Africa. This creates a quiet but powerful effect. When African engineers, telecom specialists, and logistic managers return home trained in China, they naturally work with Chinese system. This has nothing to do with ideology, it is practicality. Cultural influence is no longer about language alone. It is about who train African builders, coders, and planners. And right now, China is investing heavily in that future. This doesn't mean France is finished. France still have deep ties, institutions, and experience, but Africa's center of gravity is obviously shifting towards China. Not because Africa is choosing side, but because it is choosing what works, and that may be the most important change of all time. When people think about infrastructure, they usually picture bridges, roads, and ports. But in today's Africa, the most powerful infrastructure is invisible. It is the cable underground, the servers storing data, and the mobile network connecting millions of people every day. This is where China's influence has quietly expanded faster than that of France, and France is not happy about this at all. Nobody in the shoes of France will be happy about it. Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE have built or upgraded telecom network in over 40 African countries. In Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, and even South Africa, Chinese firms are deeply involved in 4G and 5G infrastructure. According to the Atlantic Council, roughly 70% of Africa's 4G network involve Chinese technology in some form. That matters because telecom networks are not just about calls and internet. They shape digital payments, e-commerce, surveillance, most times even elections. France and much of Europe have largely stepped back from this space. European firms focus on regulation and data protection standards, but they rarely compete aggressively on price or speed. African governments facing urgent connectivity need often choose the option that deliver quickly and affordably. Of course, we all know that is China. So this creates a long-term dependency that is rarely discussed. Once a country's digital systems are built on a specific technology, switching becomes expensive and disruptive most of the time. But from an African perspective, the immediate benefits are real. Mobile banking, online education, and digital entrepreneurship have exploded partly because networks expanded quickly. The questions Africa are now starting to ask is not whether Chinese technology works. Of course it does, but whether Africa is building enough local capacity to control and secure its own digital future. You see, Africa's resources remain central to global power. The continent holds about 70% of the world cobalt essential for electric vehicle batteries and a large share of copper, lithium, and rare earth minerals. China understands this very well. Over the last 2 decades, Chinese firms have secured long-term mining and supply agreements across the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, Guinea, and Zimbabwe. France's resources strategy looks different. It has historically focused on uranium in Niger, oil in Gabon, and gas in part of North Africa. This relationship was stable for decades, but they relied heavily on political continuity. As government changed and public opinion shifted, French assets weakened as well. Chinese companies often bundle resource deals with infrastructure. This makes the deal attractive to government under pressure to deliver development, but it also raises concerns. Local processing is often limited and raw materials are exported with little value added. Africans are increasingly aware of this pattern. Countries like Ghana and Zimbabwe are now pushing for local processing of minerals before export. This signals a shift. Africa no longer wants to be just a supplier, it wants to move up the value chain. Resources are still the heart of the relationship, but the rules are being renegotiated. One of the most underestimated factors in this story is public opinion. For decades, foreign policies in Africa were shaped behind closed doors. Today, social media, independent media, and the young population have changed that. Surveys by Afrobarometer shows that many Africans view China positively for its infrastructure contribution, while viewing France through the lens of colonial history and political interference. Anti-French protests in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger were not organized by government alone. They reflected genuine public frustration with France. At the same time, African citizens are not blindly pro-China. Concerns about debt, labor practices, and transparency are growing. Protests against Chinese-owned mines and factories have occurred in Zambia and the DRC. This tells us something very important. Africa is no longer offering unconditional loyalty to anyone. Influence now depends on performance, respect, and results. Governments are watching public mood closely because voters are more informed and vocal than ever. One truth becomes clear: Africa is not choosing between France and China. It is redefining the term of engagement with both countries. You see, one of the biggest differences between China and France in Africa is how they deal with politics. France often speaks, China usually stays quiet. And in today's African political climate, silence can be powerful. France has a long history of political involvement in its former colonies. French officials have openly, commented on elections, governance standards, military coup, and human rights issues. In theory, this aligns with democratic values. In practice, many Africans see it as selective and hypocritical. When leaders friendly to French interests bend rules, criticism is often softer. When they don't, pressure increases. China policy is officially called non-interference. It does not publicly criticize government, whether they are democratic, authoritarian, civilian, or military-led. This approach appeals strongly to African leaders who are tired of public lecture from former colonial powers. It also explains why China maintained relationship with governments that France distanced itself from after coup in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger Republic. But non-interference has its own cost. It can protect corrupt elites and at the same time weaken accountability. Now, African civil society groups have raised concern that China's silence enables poor governance in Africa. This difference matters because politics shapes contract, access, and long-term trust. France's voice once carried authority. Today, it often triggers resistance. China's silence filled that space quietly but effectively. A common mistake in global media is to describe Africa as choosing between China and France. On the ground, something more strategic is happening. African governments are learning to negotiate. Let's take, for instance, Senegal. Take Senegal. It worked closely with France in finance and diplomacy while partnering with China on infrastructure. Rwanda attracts Chinese investment but maintains strong European ties. Nigeria balances Chinese construction contract with Western financial system. This balancing act reflects a deeper understanding. No single partner can deliver everything Africa needs. China provides speed and scale. France and Europe provide regulatory experience, access to global finance, and institutional support. The danger lies in weak negotiation. Countries that fail to demand local job, technology transfer, and fair term risk repeating old patterns under new partners. Those that negotiate firmly gain leverage. Africa's bargaining power is stronger than ever. Its population will double by 2050. Its minerals are essential for the global energy transition. The question is no longer who wants Africa, it is how Africa uses that demand. The shift from dependency to negotiation marks a quiet but historic change. Now, let's return to the question we asked at the beginning. Is China offering Africa a better deal or just a faster one? The answer is both. China delivers infrastructure quickly and at a scale, but speed sometimes comes at the cost of debt pressure and limited local value creation. Now, is France losing influence because Africa is changing or because France fails to adapt? The answer leans towards adaptation. Africa has changed faster than France's approach. Old assumption and style no longer hold. Can Africa country use this rivalry without, falling into new dependence? Yes, but only through strong institutions, transparent contract, and informed public debate. This rivalry itself is not the danger. Poor governance is more dangerous. These answers are not ideological, they are practical, based on what Africans experience every single day. The most important takeaway from this story is simple but powerful. Africa is no longer just a stage where global powers compete. Now, it is becoming an actor that shapes the competition. China's rise and France's decline in influence reveal more about Africa than about either country. Africans are demanding results, respect, and relevance. They are questioning old relationships and testing new ones as well. This does not mean the future belongs to China or that France is finished, not at all. It means influence must now be earned but not inherited. Road must lead somewhere. Laws must build capacity. Partnership must feel fair. Africa's position in global geopolitics is changing because Africans themselves are changing it, and that may be the most important story of all time in African history.